Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Secretary of State for Scotland, the Right Honourable Alistair Jack MP.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is great to be back in Aberdeen, the centre of our mission to be net zero here in Scotland. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my Scotland Office ministerial team, to thank Malcolm Offord, first of all, who recently moved to the Department for Business and Trade full-time, where he's going to be responsible for exports and for UKIM. And I'd like to thank Malcolm for the great service he gave to the Scotland Office. Also John Lamont, my Parliamentary Under-Secretary. John continues to work tirelessly for the United Kingdom Government across Whitehall and across Scotland. I don't know this music. Can you hear this music, eh? What's this music? So is it my theme tune or something? I don't know. I'm retiring. I don't need a theme tune. Ah, it's gone. It's gone, ladies and gentlemen, it's gone. But no, John, he works tirelessly across Whitehall and across Scotland for our office, and I thank him. And then, of course, there's the Camerons. There's my PPS, Lisa Cameron, a truly, truly great signing by our Prime Minister. Where is she? There she is. I don't think she'll mind me telling you that even more pleased than the Prime Minister or me was her Conservative mother, who said that they can now all spend Christmas together again. And then our most recent signing, a man, and I'm sure he'd agree with me when I say this, a man whose family have come a long way since they raised a standard at Glenfinnan nearly 300 years ago, and then proceeded south to throw King George II off the throne. And had Prince Charlie succeeded back then, he would have been Charles III. So I like the fact that our King, Charles III, has appointed Donald Lord Cameron of Lochiel, and an excellent addition to the Scotland Office he is. Ladies and gentlemen, those Camerons, and this is how I reflect on this, these, for all of us, those Camerons, and I include in that the returning Foreign Secretary, just prove that there's a road back and hope for all of us. Conference, it's been some year since, or just over a year, but some years since Nicola Sturgeon resigned. And that was hard on the heels of the unprecedented Section 35 order that I laid against her ill-conceived Gender Recognition Reform Bill. And camper vans and evidence tents aside, I think the whole nation has seen the SNP exposed for what they truly are. They are not a serious party of government, and I know that working with them day in, day out. What they are is a single-issue movement obsessed with separatism. And the longer it goes on, the more our fellow Scots suffer. And I said it had been just over a year since I stopped that bill, going for royal assent. And I remember at that time, some of the commentators said that it would lead to independence or to a second independence referendum. But others thought differently. And one of those, who I needed to back me, was our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He agreed with that decision in a heartbeat, and he never wavered. And that support from him, I can tell you, has not been a one-off. For example, the Scottish Government's flawed deposit return scheme, highly inflationary, undermining an unfettered drinks market across the UK, a scheme that was unable to cater for online purchases for the elderly, the infirm, and those that couldn't take the recyclable products back because, as the chairman of Tesco at the time said, they wouldn't supply online any of the supermarkets any recyclable products. So there were many flaws, and even flaws that were pointed out by the chief exec or chairman of Tesco's at the time were ignored by the Scottish Government. And I could go on with the flaws in that scheme, but suffice to say, Rishi saw those flaws, he agreed with it, and he backed the stance I took. And one other example. He is the only party leader to stand foursquare behind our oil and gas industry. Day in, day out, I witnessed the Prime Minister making decisions to strengthen our United Kingdom, to create a better Scotland. An intangible form that comes in £3 billion that is directly invested into local governments in Scotland, through free ports, through investment zones, through the Levelling Up Fund, through the city and region growth deals, through the United Kingdom Shared Prosperity Fund, the community ownership, the towns funds. I could go on, the list goes on. But suffice to say, it is why we must and we will deliver more seats for him come the general election. And quite simply, and in conclusion, what we need to do is to show him that we have the faith in him that he has in us. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce to you your leader, your Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Please. Thank you and good afternoon. It's great to be here in Scotland, in Aberdeen, the energy capital of the UK. And as Michael Gove assures me, the nightlife capital too. And it's especially great to be with all of you. I am proud to lead the Conservative and Unionist Party. And I'm so proud of how the Scottish Conservatives, under Douglas's strong leadership, are the one party standing up for the people of Scotland and trying to move Scotland forward. Just look at the record. It was the Scottish Conservatives who stood up to the absurdities of the Scottish nationalist proposed, Labour-backed gender recognition reforms. And it was our Secretary of State, the brave and far-sighted, clear-sighted Alistair Jack, who issued the Section 35 order that stopped this nonsense in its tracks. Alistair, thank you for everything that you do to keep our union strong. It is the Scottish Conservatives who were opposing the SNP, making Scotland the most taxed part of the United Kingdom, while the Conservative government is cutting tax for every worker in Britain. The Nationalists are raising tax on everyone who earns more than £28,000 a year. And it's only the Scottish Conservatives who are defending our energy security and the thousands of jobs here in the North East that depend on the oil and gas sector. A vote for anyone else is a vote to shut down this industry. Now, what the Nationalists, in hock to their Green allies, can't see is that if you destroy the industry that we have here now, you will stop Aberdeen being home to the industries of the future. And as for Labour, well, it says so much about them that they don't want to ban all oil and gas, they just want to ban British oil and gas with their ban on North Sea exploration. It shows so clearly that their values are not our country's values, that they put virtue signalling ahead of our nation's energy security. And it also shows that for all their splits on other issues, Starmer and Sarwar are completely united in wanting to shut this industry down. And so in sum, Labour and the SNP would mean fewer jobs right here in the North East. And Douglas, thank you to you and all your team at Holyrood for standing up to this madness. Now, we should all be incredibly proud because the United Kingdom has a great record on renewable energy. We're the first major economy to have halved our emissions. And thanks to the northeast of Scotland, the UK is a world leader when it comes to offshore wind. But we have to get this transition right. I'm not going to damage our competitiveness or load costs onto hard-pressed households in an ideological quest to go faster than the technology allows. But Labour is blinded by their own zeal on this issue. First, you remember they were committed to spending £28 billion a year to decarbonise the grid by 2030. Then they dropped the policy. But it turned out they kept the policy and just wanted to drop the price tag. And we all know what that means. It means higher taxes and higher energy bills. That's what we have to stop, and that's what the Conservatives will do. Now, look, I know how tough the last couple of years have been for everyone. COVID, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which sent energy prices soaring just as we thought we were through the pandemic. And as both Chancellor and Prime Minister, I've sought to protect people across the United Kingdom. During COVID, I wasn't interested in having a political rammy with the Scottish Government, but protecting jobs, which we did. Almost 1 million jobs here in Scotland supported through furlough. Last winter, we paid around half of a typical family's energy bill to shield people from the impact of Putin's energy price spike. And we focused on getting inflation down as the most important thing that we needed to do to create the conditions for sustainable growth. And now, with inflation halved, our economic policy can change gears. We've already provided a UK-wide £9 billion tax cut for workers across the country, and we've cut taxes for businesses, for business investment to the tune of £11 billion. So the choice before the country now is a clear one. Stick to our plan that is starting to deliver the change that people want to see, or go back to square one with Labour. But here in Scotland, the choice is even more stark. If Labour would take the UK back to square one, the SNP would take Scotland back literally 300 years. Now look, I know the SNP haven't had their troubles to seek over the past year, but nobody should be in any doubt about the continuing threat they pose to Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. If you want to see better schools, more economic growth, safer streets, and a government that works for the whole of Scotland, then every day that the SNP remain in power is a wasted day. I was reflecting that they've actually been in power at Holyrood since before the smartphone was invented. And what does Scotland have to show for it? All too little. Children being failed as their schools fall down international league tables. Workers having to pay hundreds of pounds more in tax than their English counterparts. And still, no ferries for the islands. Their obsession with tearing Scotland out of our United Kingdom is all-consuming, and it simply crowds out everything else. In fact, they're so obsessed with difference for difference sake that when we banned XL bullies, they said, no, we'll go our own way. I mean, this political posturing has tragic consequences, and it just shows you that they put division above even the safety of our streets. And astonishingly, after even 16 different papers on independence, they still can't answer the basic questions. What's the currency going to be? What happens to pensions? What happens to trade? It's their obsession with independence that is holding Scotland back. Now, I recently saw the news of an experience in Glasgow, leaving customers unhappy, demanding refunds, and I thought the parallels with the SNP are anything but wonky. Now, I want to see those better schools, a flourishing economy and safer streets in Scotland. So does everyone in this hall, and so do millions of other people across Scotland. But as with Nicola Sturgeon, as long as Humza Yousaf is in Bute House, separatism will be put above the interests of all Scots. Conference, to get Scotland moving again, we finally need to move the SNP on. And that will be the choice here in Scotland when the election comes. Remain stuck in a constitutional time warp with the SNP while schools, hospitals and the economy are neglected, or act to kick out nationalist MPs. And as has been shown at every general election over the past decade, the strongest vote you can cast against the SNP is a vote for the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. And that is the best way to end the SNP monopoly, put the constitutional debate to bed and get Scotland moving again. Now, I believe so passionately that we are stronger together as one united kingdom. And I know people here in Scotland want to see all their politicians putting their shoulder to the wheel for the common good. And that's why we've worked constructively with the Scottish Government to deliver 2 green freeports. Our shared prosperity fund is backing hundreds of projects across Scotland, and we and councils across the nation are improving lives together. Just here in the North East, we've provided £20 million for strengthening Aberdeen's town centre, and £18 million for a cultural quarter in Peterhead. And we are funding a new ferry to Fair Isle. Now, the United Kingdom is a great country. We are the most successful, multi-ethnic, multi-faith, multinational democracy on earth. And Conference, I will defend that every day that I'm in office. I will have no truck with the nationalist desire to set Scot against Scot and Scots against the English. I know we are stronger together. Our country is an enormous source of good in the world. We have led the world in supporting Ukraine. Our alliance with Australia and the United States will keep the peace in the Pacific for decades to come. And 6 million children across Africa are receiving their first ever malaria vaccine thanks to British funding and research. So, in conclusion, let's stand up for our country, our United Kingdom. Let's give it the brighter future that it deserves, and let's send the nationalists back home to think again. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Conference, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Conference, thanks. Thank you. But listen, I also want to hear from you. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I want to try and answer as many of your questions as I can. And helping me do that is Douglas Ross, our superb leader of the Scottish Conservatives. He's going to make sure that we get through everything on time. And I just want to say, Douglas is a man who, against the odds, denied Nicola Sturgeon that outright majority that she wanted in 2021. And if Douglas hadn't held the line, history over the last few years would have been very different. We all owe him an enormous debt of gratitude for that. So please join me in welcoming him to the stage. Very good.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Prime Minister. You've had a busy day in the North East, down to Montrose with Claire and Alistair, up to Aberdeen. You've brought the weather with you. Aberdeen has never looked so bright and sunny, so delighted you've done that. But I've been in some of the meetings with you, and I know one of the issues that's come up quite a lot when you were speaking to the press earlier on, and I know comes up with all of our MPs, MSPs, councillors, is taxation. So we've got a question from David in Aberdeen, who's asking, what are you doing to reduce taxes for hard-working families?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when it comes to the weather, actually, I hope I can take some of this weather back to London with me, because it's very much that way round today. Look, we have been talking about taxation today, and that's because there's now a very clear contrast between what the SNP government is doing here in Scotland and what the UK government is doing across the country. I talked a little bit about it, but right now, the SNP government have made Scotland the high tax capital of the UK. Anyone earning just over £28,000 is paying more tax in Scotland than they would in England. Now, in contrast, what we're doing is delivering one of the biggest tax cuts for workers that we've seen in recent time. Everyone in work is receiving a tax cut worth, on average, around £450, someone on an average salary of 35k, because of the cuts we've made to national insurance. And as Alistair's always keen to remind the Chancellor, national insurance is a UK-wide tax. We have chosen to cut a UK-wide tax because we're a party of the union, and that's been putting more money in people's bank accounts since the beginning of the year, because we know things are difficult. And as we always said as Conservatives, we believe, don't we, in a society where hard work is rewarded. That's the type of country that we all believe in.
And of course, just this week we've had the final Scottish budget passed in Holyrood. SNP and Green MSPs coming together to push through their tax and acts budget.
Yep.
So we're getting the worst of both worlds here in Scotland. We are paying more in tax and we're getting less in our services.
Yeah, and actually we talked about tax on people. The other thing that we should also highlight, that the SNP have also put taxes up on small businesses. So if you're a typical restaurant, pub, retailer, those businesses are the lifeblood of our communities, our high streets, our town centres, our villages. Now, we've given them a 75% discount off their business rates. And the SNP government, of course, were given money as part of the Barnett formula. They haven't passed that on. So right now, a typical pub in Scotland has a business rates bill that is perhaps 3 times higher than it would be if they were in England. Just think about that. It's thousands and thousands of pounds paid by all those small and medium-sized businesses, and it just shows that their priorities are not the right one. And as you said, that tax and acts budget didn't just put taxes up, it didn't prioritise public services in the way that we have. So NHS funding in Scotland, as has been remarked on, is actually going down after you control for inflation in this next year. Right? I don't think that's what people want to see. They want to see more investment in the NHS. That's what we're doing in England, and we're cutting people's taxes. Those are our priorities. But when you're obsessed with independence, you don't focus on the people's priorities, and that's what we see is happening here in Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next question is from Wilma in Gourock, who you met earlier when we were walking around. She asks, Hamza Yousaf claiming Scotland doesn't get enough funding. How do we challenge that misleading narrative?
Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's right, because they just don't want to take any responsibility, right? And that's crystal clear. Now, what I would point out, as we were doing together with Alistair this morning, is the SNP receives £41 billion in a record block grant. The last couple of fiscal events have provided an extra £2.5 billion, and right now there's £1.25 available to spend in Scotland compared to £1 on average across the UK. Right? So no one can say that there isn't enough funding going in, but actually the question is, how are the SNP choosing to use it? And actually their mismanagement of public finances is what's leading people to say, why is there not enough investment going on? But I think that you, Douglas, and the team here do an excellent job of pointing that out, and we've just got to keep pointing it out. Right? They are accountable for public spending in Scotland. The choices are their choices. And what we've seen is a kind of record increase in the welfare bill, when I last checked, and not enough investment going into the NHS and not enough investment going into cutting people's taxes. And their priorities are very clear. Those are not the priorities, I believe, of the vast majority of hard-working people in Scotland, but we're going to be the party that champions them and their interests.
Good. We are rattling through these. Next up, Robert from Selkirk wrote in to ask, the UK government is doing a lot to promote the benefits of the union in Scotland and around the rest of the country. Tell us about your passion for the union and what more we can be doing to promote Scotland's place in the United Kingdom.
Well, gosh, a lot in there from Robert. One of the things that Alistair has done brilliantly over the past years, and I saw it when I was just a junior member of the Cabinet and then became Chancellor and had the opportunity to work with him, is make the point that the UK government should be doing more to demonstrate the benefits of the union in Scotland. And we had the opportunities post-Brexit to do more of that, and that's what we've been doing. And you touched on it in your speech, Alistair. Douglas has spoken about it. Right now, across Scotland, dozens of local communities, towns are receiving investment direct from the UK government. Aberdeen city centre, Peterhead, ferries to Fair Isle, I can keep going on, right? And that has been a really positive development. That didn't used to happen before. It was something that Alistair and you were very clear we should do. And we've done it. Because as a UK government, as a UK Prime Minister, I want people to see that we are investing directly in their communities. So that's what we've done. I think the other thing is constructively working with the Scottish Government where we can. I think that's an entirely reasonable thing to do. People would like to see that. And we've done that to deliver 2 free ports. And that is an exciting development. Those areas are going to attract jobs and investment for the future, and they demonstrate, again, the benefit of being part of the UK, and they've been very warmly welcomed. So I think the more we can do those things, and then the last thing I'd say, actually, is promoting Scottish interests abroad. And again, we've got a great track record in opening up new markets for Scottish exporters like Scotch whisky, removing tariffs, making sure our diplomatic service promotes Scottish culture and trade as they do. So taken together, there's a really strong set of things we can point to where there's not just the union dividend, the £1.25 I talk about, but a practical set of things that show that the UK government cares about Scotland, is investing in Scotland, and demonstrates that we are stronger together.
Absolutely. Yeah. As you might imagine with this next topic, we've had a lot of questions in about transport and infrastructure in Scotland, and some of them are phrased around if it's useful for the UK government to do more in this field to help promote the union and that union dividend. So Ronald from Glasgow and Chris from Granton are asking about the state of the A9, going from Perth to Inverness, further north obviously, but promised to be dualled and has not been dualled. We've got Peter from the Scottish Borders asking about the A77 and the A75. What's your view on what the UK government can do in this area, but also the dismal track record that the SNP have in promising to do a lot in this field and absolutely failing the communities by not delivering?
I think that's the first thing to say, actually, Douglas, that you and the team have done a great job of highlighting that. And nowhere is that more evident than when it comes to the ferry debacle, right? I mean, it's a total disaster, and all these promises made, not kept, and that's a good example of us in the UK government stepping in to provide that much-needed connectivity, which we've done. Now, without getting into the individual roads one by one, or testing my geography slightly, because of the decision that we made on HS2, which was a big decision, right? That was a big decision. I think it's the right one for the country, where that project I didn't think represented the right priority for us. The facts have changed, and so we've taken every penny of that money and we're going to invest it in local transport across the country. And one of the projects that we've prioritised is the A75, that Gretna to Stranraer connection, which is really important, particularly economically. That's one of the projects that's going to receive extra funding from the UK government as a result of the decision on HS2. So again, it's just another example of us stepping in, doing things that will make a difference to people, focusing on the things that they care about, and that's the kind of practical government that you'll get from the UK and the Conservatives.
Brilliant. We're in the energy capital of Europe, despite Hamza Yousaf saying just a couple of months ago that he wished that would come to an end, and then he travels up here and pretends to be a friend of the oil and gas industry, which, as you said in your speech, neither he nor Labour are. One of our questions has come from an avid reader of the P&J, and you're on the front page today. You obviously made some comments to the P&J. Claire, as our Secretary of State, was also speaking to the Scottish media about the vital need to ensure that energy security is there for all of us, for our homes, for our businesses, and also for the jobs that rely on the North Sea oil and gas industry here in the North East and across the country. So what more can you tell us about our plans as Conservatives, but also how damaging the Labour and SNP plans will be?
So the Independent Committee for Climate Change say that we're going to need oil and gas for decades to come. I think most sensible people recognise that. So then the question is, where do you want to get that from? Right? So our view is very clear. Right? Claire set it out very powerfully. Well, of course, we should prioritise the resources we have at home, and that means backing the North Sea. That's good for our energy security, that's good for the economy, and it's good for the 200,000 jobs across that supply chain, half of which are in Scotland. And that seems just obvious common sense to me, but what do you have from the SNP in hock to the Greens or Labour? They're just more focused on virtue signalling than they are on what's in the national interest, and particularly what's in Scotland's interest. So look, we are going to continue to champion the North Sea. We've got legislation that's going to mean we have annual licensing rounds. Again, that was criticised by the SNP. I know he's now trying to pretend he's a friend of the industry, but actually criticised our decision on licensing. And we're going to make sure that we support the skills and the transition to the future. Alistair and I were at Baker Hughes this morning, and what an enormous source of pride. You talk to any global executive in the oil and gas industry, and they talk about the incredible talent here in Scotland because of the North Sea. The people that we've got, the skills they have, are second to none. They are world leading. And at the plant Alistair and I were at this morning, they are making incredibly complex pieces of kit with Claire that are being exported around the world. This is the best place in the world to do that. And those same people, by the way, those same incredibly talented Scottish people, will at some point transition from doing that to working on carbon capture and storage. It's exactly the same set of skills. But if you kill off the industry now, those people won't have a future. And that is what the SNP and Labour are doing.
One of the more difficult issues that certainly come to the media attention in the last few days has been security around MPs, around elected representatives. We've had our own issues in Holyrood, where a Green MSP was inciting some of that hatred outside and stopping apprentices in our defence industry getting into a reception to celebrate their successes. But a number of our members have mentioned the policing of protest following large marches in Edinburgh and in London. How do you think these should be handled? How are we doing in terms of handling the right for people to feel free to express their views, but also ensure everyone's kept safe?
Yeah, look, it's really concerning what we've been seeing over the past few weeks and months, and I'm sure all of you share my concerns about that. We've got MPs' homes being surrounded, events locally in their areas being targeted, council meetings being disrupted. Just the other week, or last week, we have anti-Semitic tropes being beamed onto Parliament, and we had long-standing parliamentary rules changed because of fears about MP safety. So that is incredibly concerning, and I think there is a minority of people who are trying to undermine our values. I don't think that's acceptable. I spoke to the police about exactly this earlier this week. I think everyone expects us to be able to maintain safety, but maintain order. Of course, people have a right to protest, but that has to be done respectfully and peacefully. And sadly, too many of the things we've seen recently have crossed the line. I'll be saying a little bit more about this later today, but the safety of those involved in the democratic process and those processes themselves is paramount. It's integral to our country, our society, and that's why this week we announced a new democratic policing protocol with police forces to ensure the integrity and safety of those democratic processes, coupled with extra funding for them to be able to do that. Because our country is founded on strong traditions of freedom and democracy and the rule of law, and we need to absolutely protect those against them, of the minority of people who seek to undermine those British values.
Yeah, absolutely. Prime Minister, our time is up. We have got through a large number of topics and questions. I know the members really appreciate your time here at conference today, everything you've been doing over the course of your visit, your speech, your answer to the questions that they had submitted. So on my behalf, on behalf of everyone in this hall, people who can't be here, thank you for the work you're doing leading the UK government. Thank you for everything you are doing for our party at a national level. We've got your back and we'll be fighting hard to make sure you return to number 10 after the next election. Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Supporting young people in our rural communities will be starting shortly in Hall A, and please proceed to Hall B for our local government panel sessions.